Welcome to Disturbing the Peace. I am your host, Stephen Davis, sitting in for John Amanchukwu, coming to you live from YREVWUTRUTH Studios. And we have with us today Corey DeAngelis, the school choice evangelist. I love that name. And we're going to be talking about the public school system, where it went wrong, how it went wrong, and the damage it has wrought on our young people. All here today on Disturbing the Peace.
Protector on a mission from heaven, there's too much at stake to be quiet. Let's disturb the peace, me and you. Let's disturb the peace. With John Amanchukwu. Disturb the peace. I'm a protector on a mission from heaven, there's too much at stake to be quiet. Let's disturb the peace, me and you. Disturb the peace. With John Amanchukwu. Disturb the peace.
My guest today has been called the most effective school choice advocate since Milton Friedman. He has a PhD in education policy from the University of Arkansas, national best-selling author of The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from Radicals Ruining Our Schools. He's a senior fellow at the American Cultural Project, executive director at the Educational Freedom Institute, and the man who coined the phrase, fund students, not systems. Boy, I tell you, Corey DeAngelis, thank you, and welcome to Disturbing the Peace.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Stephen.
Oh, thank you for your time. This is going to be a phenomenal time. And I want to first play this clip and see if you recognize this fellow talking.
Anybody want to guess how much we spend per student average? $20,000 per student. That's
more
about
now.
60% higher than the average private school tuition in this country. They get worse results, and the spending has increased over time by about 170%, even after adjusting for inflation since 1970. Teacher salaries have been flat since that time. They've only increased 3%. The money goes towards administrative bloat, people like Randi Weingarten, who make over $500,000 a year, people like Becky Pringle, she's the head of the NEA, the largest teachers union in the country. She makes over $500,000 a year as well. They are basically a money laundering operation for the Democrat Party. 99% of the campaign contributions from the teachers unions go to Democrats every single election cycle. Wash, rinse, repeat.
That's right.
I have a question. The burning question on everybody's mind. Why are the teacher unions almost unilaterally funding the Democrat Party? I mean, what kind of back scratching is going on here between the teachers union and the Democrat Party?
Yeah, it's a one-sided money laundering operation. And basically, the teachers union is an arm of the Democrat Party at this point. And in fact, Becky Pringle, who popped up on the screen, she's still an at-large member of the Democrat National Committee. And Randi Weingarten, who also popped up on the screen, both of them make over $500,000 a year. She was an at-large member of the DNC. She left because it wasn't far left enough for her. So they're trying to even pull the Democrats into Marxism even more so than they already have. And because they give all their money to one party, well, those Democrats, even if things like school choice are a bipartisan issue among the voters, the teachers unions control the politicians who vote against school choice. So even though Democrats' constituents in places that have failing government schools would benefit more than anybody else from school choice, they're more likely to vote against it, which is almost counterintuitive until you follow the money.
And it's absolutely crazy because I'm looking at, and there's a lot of Democrat individuals that I have are friends, right?
Yeah.
And they are in favor, full favor of school choice. But
yeah, especially when it comes to, Stephen, these politicians and the union bosses, their own kids, they're in favor of school choice. Elizabeth Warren, she sent her kids to private school. You think about in Chicago, they have 80 public schools with not a single kid proficient in math. They even have one school that's 97% empty, yet it's still open. It was built for over 1,000 kids. They only have 27 students, 28 adults, a 1-to-1 student to staff ratio. They spend about $100,000 a kid there. Not a single child is proficient in math or reading. And their teachers union president, her name is Stacey Davis Gates there in Chicago. She called school choice racist a couple of years ago, but now she sends her own kid to a private school. It's so hypocritical. School choice for me, but not for thee.
Of course. Oh, Charlie Kirk always used to say if the left didn't have any double standards, they would have no standards at all. And that is clearly evident in this situation here. These people who are promoting this idea within their actions of school choice, but when it comes to the words and their vote, obviously it's the exact opposite. And is there any way we can continue to, what do we do to call this out? How do we bring attention to something like this?
Hey, sunlight's the best disinfectant. So if you could just point out the money flow, it starts to raise alarm bells for a lot of people. And then, for example, Mark Kelly is a senator out of Arizona. He's a Democrat. He just sponsored a bill to get rid of President Trump's new nationwide school choice program, which 31 states have already signed up to do it, even 2 Democrat states. Kathy Hochul in New York, she said she's going to do it. Jared Polis out of Colorado, he even reached across the aisle and said he's going to do it. He even said it was a no-brainer decision, school choice. But now you have Mark Kelly out of Arizona. He has 34 co-sponsors to get rid of this program that is going to benefit a lot of kids all across the country in red states and blue states alike. I just looked it up over the weekend and found out that at least 50% of those 34 co-sponsors either went to private school themselves or sent their kids to private school. And it's probably higher than that, but at the bare minimum, at least 50% of them exercised school choice for their own family or benefited from it themselves. And that's pulling up the ladder from behind themselves. And so I think the way we get out of this is calling it out. And at the end of the day, the voters need to hold these politicians accountable. The GOP is already doing the right thing. The Republicans have emerged as the parents' party at this point. And that's hurting Democrats in the polls. If you think about it, President Trump won the parent vote by 9 points nationally, the popular parent vote. And he also won the education vote by a few points too, which Democrats used to win on education. Now they're not anymore. And it's because the parents are waking up and holding people accountable. And that's the only way forward.
You know, I just want to touch on that for a moment, what you just said, that last bit, because I remember during COVID, right? I think that was kind of the tipping point. Can you kind of speak to that? I remember seeing you in the clip speaking to this very thing.
Yeah, that's right. The teachers unions overplayed their hand. They lobbied the CDC of all things. You thought this was a health organization following the science. No, they were following the political science. And the teachers unions held children's education hostage to secure billions of dollars in ransom payments from taxpayers. In fact, they got $190 billion from the taxpayers because they said, oh, if we don't get any more money, we're not going to open. In fact, I did an analysis at the time which found that, if anything, the schools that had more money were less likely to open because they had more powerful teachers unions fighting for both of those things at the same time, school closures and more funding. And then when they got the money, they moved the goalpost and said, you know what, we're just gonna have some other excuse. But the thing is, there was a silver lining. Families got to see what was happening in the classroom. We saw this with Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, Republican. He won on education with education voters by 6 points in a blue state that apparently went to Biden the year before. And that's because his opponent, the Democrat, Terry McAuliffe, he said, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. It was a bold strategy, Cotton. It didn't work out for him. And so that is the blueprint for political success for Republicans. Trump did the same thing. He fought for universal school choice, abolishing the Department of Education. He ran on getting this transgender insanity out of the schools. And these are 80-20 issues. They're on the side of the people. They're on the side of the public. And the special interests are going down once and for all. The teachers unions are scurrying. They are freaking out because they're losing their power, which they've been drunk on for far too long. One last thing I'll say about Randi Weingarten is it just was unveiled that she funneled about $1.4 million towards her vanity project, her book, from the teachers unions. So if you're a teacher and you're like, why are my dues going towards this lady who makes way too much money already so she can get on the New York Times bestseller list? Maybe I'll pull my funding. So many teachers are now leaving the government school unions. In fact, there's this group called the Teacher Freedom Alliance. 15,000 teachers have joined their ranks in the past year alone and left their government unions. That's how you hold Randi Weingarten accountable.
I love it. This is the way we fight back. This is what you're supposed to do. And I would dare ask you, at what point did the union stop representing teachers and started representing a political party.
Private student loan debt in the U.S. totals about $300 billion. About $45 billion of that is labeled as distressed, while refi refinances distressed or defaulted private student loans that others won't touch. They provide you with a custom loan payment based on your ability to pay. While Refi is not a debt settlement company, and they work with each borrower individually, tailoring each loan to each borrower's specific situation. You will not be contacting a faceless call center. While Refi can reduce your monthly payment and guarantees interest rates under 6%, ensuring affordability and financial relief. Why Refi does not care what your credit score is. Why Refi can save you thousands of dollars by refinancing and even lower your total cost. Just call 888-YREFI-85 or log on to whyrefi.com. That's whyrefi.com.
Yeah, there's no specific, time and over, there's no like one thing you can point to, but I'd say that's been like this from the beginning. You think about it, the beginning of our compulsory education system in America came from Prussia, which is modern day Germany. It was about creating obedient factory workers. It was about creating obedient soldiers. They were upset in Prussia about losing a war to Napoleon. They said, well, what better way to create obedience than to start young and mold the minds of other people's children. Meanwhile, the guy who brought that system to America, his name's Horace Mann. He was the Secretary of Education in Massachusetts, and he wanted this mass school system which basically treated children as widgets for everybody else's kids. But then we found out he homeschooled his own kids. So this hypocrisy started from the very beginning, and the teachers union, they've had the backing of Congress since 1909. At least they got a federal charter, which no other labor union has that kind of special privilege. There's actually a bill in Congress right now, Stephen, to revoke that federal charter being pushed by Republicans. They should do that. I mean, Randi Weingarten's union doesn't even get a federal charter, but Becky Pringle's does. The National Education Association has this kind of special privilege, this false sense of legitimacy bestowed to them by Congress. It's time we right the wrong and get rid of that. We should pull that federal charter, or at least use it against them. There's another bill to say, hey, you want to keep that federal charter, go ahead, but you can't engage in political activity anymore. The thing is, the Democrats benefit from this relationship. They almost have an incestuous relationship with the teachers unions, and it's about time. It's got to end at some point. And one last thing I'll say about Randi Weingarten is she just bragged about this on an internal video call with her members, and I blasted it all over social media. But she was bragging to them about how she leveraged her position as a union president at the American Federation of Teachers to bully Target executives, the retail outlet, to say, if you don't come out against ICE, immigration enforcement, then we're going to leverage our pension funds against you. We hold 8% of your stock in our pensions. That is a breach of fiduciary duty, and Congress needs to investigate her. I think that's illegal.
They need to do that now. Okay, that needs to happen. And while she's doing all of this, we have a system that is failing our children, like deliberately. And let me get your reaction to this next clip. Play clip number 2, because this is going to be good.
The biggest issue I think that we're facing in America is education. We have lowered our expectations of children. And that to me is a terrible thing. It's not necessarily about politics. It's really about the quality of education. It's what we're teaching them. It's the fact that we're not teaching them how to think creatively, how to problem solve. We're teaching them how to just memorize and regurgitate and never step out of line, because if you step out of line, there's going to be cancel culture against you. And this idea that if you're of a certain color, you should be spoken with in a certain way or spoken at in a certain way. If we keep pushing that, we're going to just raise a generation of humans that only know how to look for victimization. But all of these major issues that our country is facing, it's going to be even harder for us to address them if we don't raise our children well. I'm going to say something really bold about my advice for parents, and that is everybody has to get involved. you can't just rely on somebody else to fix your problems. And the school is your problem.
Ouch.
Very good. Yeah, Marissa's amazing at PragerU. You actually have a video there, one of their 5-minute ones called Fund the Children, Not the Schools. Kind of the idea of school choice, funding the student, not the system, having the money follow the child. But she hits the nail on the head on that short clip where she points out it goes beyond test scores. We rail against the test score failures every single day. I mean, the nation's report card scores just came out showing that less than a third of kids are proficient in math and reading in this country, despite us spending now over $21,000 per student per year. In places like New York City, it's like $40,000 per student per year. But it goes beyond that. Vodi Bakum said it best. We cannot continue to send our children to Caesar for their education and be surprised when they come home as Romans. Kids are getting bullied in the government school system. They're being told to just sit there, do what they're told. And it's even worse than that. They're misbehaving. There's lax discipline policies as well, which gets to the character of the students and that kind of moral development that we'd like, which religious education is a good way to get there, but they don't even allow that in the public schools anymore. So that moral formation of the children is severely lacking in the public school system. And don't even get me started on the sexualized topics of pornography books for younger children in the schools, things like critical race theory and gender ideology. These are Marxist concepts that divide children based on immutable characteristics, get them to pit themselves against each other and it pits them against themselves in some cases as well. So I think the better way forward is to focus on the basics, but also have student-driven education. Mm-hmm. Think about the one-room schoolhouse throughout our history where, you have more individualized learning approaches where you're not just teaching to the lowest common denominator. I mean, think about it. The teachers in the public school system have the hardest job possible right now. There's kids assigned to them just based on where they live. They may or may not be interested in what's going on in that school. They can't have a specialized mission in most of the public schools. So, kids are there, they're bored, they're trying to be on their cell phones instead. The teachers feel like their hands are tied because they can't discipline the children because of the Obama era guidance kind of still bleeds over to today, where the administrators feel like that they can't punish kids so you have schools basically turned into war zones. It's not safe for children. And then even beyond that, you have people who go through these colleges of education, they get indoctrinated too in college, and then they become teachers. And then that trickles down to the K through 12 education system. And basically, the public school system has turned into an institution where they're just churning out more Democrat voters every single year. And a lot of people get into it even because they figure out they don't even have to have their own kids anymore, Stephen, and they can still shape the direction of this country by molding the minds of 50 million children that don't belong to them. And so in places like California, they're keeping secrets from parents despite a Supreme Court decision that recently came out saying you can't keep secrets from parents anymore. But they're so hell-bent on this gender ideology that they're going to keep going as long as possible until they're held accountable legally, financially, or some other way. And that's why parents, like Marissa said, at the end of the day, you can't just surrender your children to Caesar. You can't give them to the government schools. But if you do, if you can't homeschool, if you can't afford private school, if your state doesn't have school choice, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. You need to keep your eye on everything that's going on. And if they upset you and if they try to go counter to everything you're trying to do at home, you need to push back at the school board meetings, make your voices heard, and tell them, not today, Satan. These are my kids, not yours. They don't belong to the government.
Oh, that is beautiful. All of that was beautiful. I think that really speaks to the heart of what's going on right now. The amount of indoctrination, the Marxist indoctrination, as you were talking about, the critical race theory, the LGBTQ, I mean, everything from the top down. You think anything you can think of, they're teaching that anything that you think of that's antithetical to actually what they're supposed to be learning, which is reading, writing, and arithmetic. Everything of this nature is being taught to the children, and they're creating this this victim culture, especially with the amount of IEPs, right? These individual education programs and all this sort of things. Why is this being promoted and all these accommodations given to these children that is going to eventually hamstring them later on in life?
Yeah, it labels the kids basically as failures and says, you know, basically, if you're a teacher, you can just write it off as an excuse. If your test scores are very low for that kid, you can just say, oh, it's not my fault. It's the child's fault. The child must have a problem. It's the same thing with the over-medication problem in the government school system. Young boys, the way that we learn is by movement, right? We shouldn't be sitting in a desk all day at 5 years old, right? And so they're told, if you're not feminine, if you're not sitting in that desk and not moving, and you know, then you have a problem with you. And if as a teacher, I'm not interesting, then it must be the child's problem. The child can't pay attention because I'm not interesting. So they shift blame 24/7. They do it to the parents, they do it to the kids. And at the end of the day, well, they also financially benefit. They have more special needs kids in the schools. They get a lot more money. They might, on average, get $20,000 per kid for an ordinary student. But if they label them with having a special need, the state funding formulas and federal funding formulas give them additional grants. So maybe that's a $50,000 kid that's sitting in the seat that might not be learning as much as they should. And so I think this gets to Marissa's point that the public schools aren't just failing on test scores. They're over-medicating children. They are the physical activity is lacking in the public school system as well. I mean, I played sports and that was a great opportunity, but so many kids going into just the regular old PE class, they're just sitting there, you know, watching their watches to see when the bell's going to ring again so they can go to the next class. And there's not really much standards. But I'm glad President Trump reintroduced the presidential fitness challenge for the public school system. At least that's a step in the right direction. But if you're a monopoly and you have no incentive to actually roll that out in the right way, childhood obesity is on the rise. It's crazy. Mental health issues and suicidal ideation is on the rise with children as well. So the factory model school system is destroying children, not just their creativity and test scores, but their health as well, their physical health, their mental health. And one last thing I'll say is I did a study on this with Western Carolina University's Angela Dills. It's a peer-reviewed publication. And the Wall Street Journal covered it a couple of years ago in an article they titled School Choice Better Than Prozac. In our study, we found that school choice laws being implemented were associated with reductions in teen suicide and increases or improvements in mental health by the time the students were 30 years of age, as according to their self-reports, all else equal. So school choice doesn't just help academics. It helps the entire child. And the teachers unions are largely to blame because what do? They fight to trap kids in their failing schools year after year. They shift the blame towards the parents and the kids themselves. And something I wanted to point out about the health problems of the public school system. They also tie school attendance in basically every state to forced injections, vaccinations for kids. And if you can afford to send your kid to a private school or homeschool your kid, you don't have to force needles into your child's arm at a very young age. And, you know, if you see the benefits of all the vaccinations, you still have that choice. But some states, I think 45 states now already allow for some form of religious exemption. That's a step in the right direction. But why should it have to be a religious reason? There's a lot of other reasons that parents might have a problem. We saw the fiasco that was COVID, where kids started having myocarditis issues. And in D.C., I was living in D.C. at the time, they were trying to force the kids to have a COVID shot to go back to school. That was extremely over the line. And data came out after that decision showing that basically 90% or so of the white kids had the shot already. And as far as the black kids, it was like less than half as likely. What would have happened is, if they would have gone forward with that rule, you would have basically had state-sanctioned segregation because of this forced vaccination schedule. They rolled it back, thankfully, but they shouldn't stop there. They should go beyond COVID, make it optional for families. And if you still want to protect your own kid and you think that a particular vaccine is good, you still have that choice. It is freedom of choice. And states like Idaho just passed a bill, a Medical Freedom Act, to get rid of those forced vaccinations. And Florida, their Surgeon General, Dr. Lapido, just announced earlier this year or last year that they are taking steps to do the same thing, to make it optional for families. I think that's another overseen problem of the public school system, that so many of us just focus on the test scores, but it's much deeper than that.
Yeah, it goes deep. I mean, a lot of these different issues that we're seeing. I mean, the low expectations, the victim culture, the health, the lack of health, the lack of all these, the union protection, and all these different things. It kind of leads to the biggest question of all, which is, have we really already lost the public school system? And with that being said, let's play this next clip and get your reaction to it.
Don't be surprised when you send your kids off to Caesar and they come back as Romans. Like, that's it. That's it, man. You're wondering why everyone's gone woke and has no idea what bathroom to use anymore. Just, if like, what happened to our kids? I'm like, well, you gave them to the government for their entire childhood. You saw them at dinner and you attended their sporting events, but the government raised your kids, and social media helped, and video games or whatever, but you saw them every day, but you didn't raise them. You didn't log enough hours each day to counteract all the poison and time wasting and ideological propagandistic crap that they were getting fed year after year after year. And so millennial generation and now Gen Z has gone woke. And we feel like, oh, what happened to my daughter? We raised him better than that. No, I mean this in love, but you didn't raise him at all. That hurts to say, because I know it hurts people to hear. And we trusted that they were being taught good information that wasn't undermining our values. But there's been a psyop in play for decades, which is undermining our values and waging war against the family unit.
Do you think parents are even aware that children or their children are being indoctrinated with this anti-ICE, anti-Christ, LGBTQ, pro-LGBTQ, pro-wokeness, pro-Marxism? Do the parents even know?
They didn't before COVID. They thought things were great, especially public schools that had an A rating. Families were just looking at that, government stamp of approval. But now, post-COVID, yeah, the schools are open, so there's not that Zoom school. It's not right in front of you like it was during those years. But we have social media now, and families are sharing their experiences at the school board meeting. So, do we need more awareness? Of course. It's not that like everybody knows 100% of what's going on. Some people have actually argued for cameras in the classroom. We have that for daycares. If you send your kid to daycare at 3 or 4 years old, it's all of a sudden fine. But when you go to kindergarten, all of a sudden it's a huge problem. And no, we can't have that because of privacy. Well, what's the difference? Well, I'll tell you the difference. It's because the unions control K through 12 education, and they don't control pre-K. They don't control daycares. And that's the private sector mostly offering pre-K and daycare. So that is one way to build more awareness. And it's a lot tougher of a political lift because of that union entrenched interest. Those special interests fight against any change to the status quo. They fight against any accountability. They fight against any school choice. But I think that clip is accurate. It's a tough pill to swallow, obviously, because it reminds me. Here's some proof for this. Actually, there are surveys asking people how they feel about the public school system. Gallup does this every couple of years, and they also ask, how do you feel about your child's local public school? And consistently in America, the latest one found that, for example, only 9% of Republicans said they had confidence in the public school system overall, but the rankings for their own child's public school is much higher. Now, why is there a disconnect? Why do only 10% of people say they like the public school system, but then they give it like A ratings for their own kid's school? It can't be both, right? So The problem is it's a form of Stockholm syndrome. No one wants to admit that they are sending their child to an institution that is actively harming them. So there's this cognitive dissonance that goes on where in order to get through the day, in order to go through and continue and humans are adaptable beings, right? Yeah. And so we're not going to live our life in pure misery. At least most people don't. Most people will adapt and try to figure out how to make things okay. One way to do that is to find a better educational environment for your kids. But another easier way to do that, I guess, is to turn a blind eye, put the blinders on and say, you know what, everything's fine. I'm going to wash my hands with it. I'm going to pretend that my child teacher is okay. When I ask them at the dinner table, is everything going okay? What'd you learn at school? And they just say, everything's fine. And I stop there. And then I checked my box for the day. As he said in that clip, that is not enough. You need to have more of an active engagement with your child. If you can, try to homeschool them. I mean, you do it before kindergarten. What do you call that? How did the kid learn how to walk? How did the kid learn how to talk? That is education. Parents are the best, the first and foremost educators of their children. They have the constitutional right and duty to provide that education and upbringing of their own kids. And don't take the easy way out. I know, yes, you're already being forced to pay through taxes for the public school system. And even in Texas, where I live, they're spending $19,000 a year per child, even in the Texas public school system. We are wasting so much taxpayer money. And you might say, well, it's free. I'm already paying for it. I might as well use it. Well, that might be a fine and dandy response if your kids come out halfway decent, but it's actively harming your child. So, free can do damage. And so you're better off, just cutting your losses. But if your state has school choice, like we do in Texas now, we have $10,000 scholarships. If you want to send your kid to a private school, you can use some of that money for homeschooling. It's capped arbitrarily in the legislature right now to only 90,000 kids. It's like a pilot program in the first year. But I expect that cap to go away. Why? Because 10,000 is less than 19,000. It saves taxpayer money every time someone uses the program and leaves the public school system. But at the end of the day, the major takeaway there is don't just put the blinders on. You need to be more actively engaged in your kids' education. I'm going to homeschool both of my children. We're already doing it right now. She's not 5 years old yet. And our son, who's on the way, our unborn child, he's coming in a few months. And one of the first conversations my wife and I had together when we first met a few years ago was, what are we going to do for education? And we were totally in sync on basically everything. You're not the same person, right, with your spouse, but on the important things, we were totally in sync. And one of those was, how do we want to educate our children? We don't want to send them to the propaganda mills, the factory model, failure factories, the public school system. We want to raise our own children. And that's basically, at the end of the day, what is education? It is the upbringing of your child that can be measured by test scores, but more importantly, it's the character development of your children. What kind of person do you want them to be? Do you want them to be a radical left activist with blue hair that goes and protests on the streets and causes trouble all the time and has Trump derangement syndrome? Or do you want them to be good people? They go get a job, they get married, they have kids, and they lead a productive and fulfilling and moral life? I think that's an easy question to answer. And it makes it easier to make that decision about, should you continue to send them to this free option that's, if it was kind of neutral and not hurting anybody, that might be okay. But when your kid's getting bullied, when you have the teenage suicide rates at record highs and this, the depression and over-medication of the public school system, you start to think about it a little differently.
Yeah, I agree. Me and my wife had this conversation as well. Like you said at the very beginning, all right, let's not waste any time. What are we doing when it comes to children? Okay. We are not sending them to Caesar. We're not doing it. We are going to raise our own children. The Bible is very clear. Raise your child in the way they should go. When they get old, they will not depart from it. Right. The Bible also says the student will be like his teacher. So who's the teacher? Right? Who's the teacher that the student's going to be like? Is it going to be like the woke teacher in the high schools and in the elementary schools and in the colleges, or is it going to be you? So that needs to be the conversation that people need to have and really look at themselves in the mirror and understand what's really going on. And I want to give one more question because, of course, I'm going to homeschool, you're going to homeschool, but for those who are still going to send their kids to the public school system, okay, how do we combat this leftist indoctrination, these teacher unions and these entities that are constantly subverting our children? What do we do? How do we fight it? How do we combat it?
Yeah, you need to continue looking out for these things. You have to talk to your kid. You have to talk with the teacher. Try to have a regular meeting with the teacher, kind of get a feel of how that teacher acts. Go to the school board meeting, see what the school board talks about. Yeah, make your voices heard at that school board meeting. And, even in states like Texas, I will say where I live, we banned, divisive concepts or critical race theory and gender ideology and stuff. But we've seen on undercover video from groups like Accuracy and Media that they're still doing it, even though they banned DEI and Trump had an executive order on this and they did it at the state level too. They said, aha, we found a loophole. We found a way around this. We just call it something else. We'll call it social emotional learning. And if you ban that, it's like whack-a-mole. We'll just call it something else. Or, hey, at the end of the day, behind closed doors, nobody's watching anyway. They don't have cameras in the classroom like they do in the daycares. And so what they do is they just move the goalposts. And so that's why you have to have the conversations with your kids. If there's no cameras in the classroom, if your child can have a recording device of some sort, maybe they ban cell phones in your state. Some states have done that already. Maybe you can still have a recording device and maybe it just captures audio so you can blast that stuff and that the teachers can be held accountable, because at the end of the day, the school system's not going to budge until they get public backlash. And even then, sometimes things don't change. I was just looking at a story at a Denver public schools this week. By the way, they only have 33% of their kids proficient in math. And they just fired a teacher who was caught after a pretty serious investigation. She was a French teacher, an LGBTQ plus activist who was lesbian herself, which by itself wouldn't be a huge problem, but she was forcing the kids or ordering them and grading them on these activities based on same-sex students kissing them each other in class. And the ones reported that, the ones who said they didn't want to do it, they were given a failing grade on the assignment. And so using your position of authority as a teacher to pressure young children to kiss each other from the same sex. And it was reported that every single time it was 2 female students kissing. So, that kind, that's why I said before, her being a lesbian wasn't a problem, but in context, it seems kind of weird that she was forcing, allegedly, according to these reports, of course, all of this, that she was forcing young female students to kiss each other in the class, and they were getting graded on this. So they had a strong incentive to go, to go forward with this. The reason I bring it up is that, well, one, it was the news of the week this week in Colorado, but she was fired. The school board unanimously voted 7-0 after public backlash. Okay. But then we just found out, like yesterday, that they rehired her somewhere else in Colorado at an elementary school. So this happens so much, Stephen, in the public school system. It's actually got a term that was created for it. It's called passing the trash. Mm-hmm. So what happens is, when some teacher is investigated for either sexual misconduct or other types of abuse in the public school system, once that investigation is open, a lot of the time the teacher will quietly resign and then go find a cushy job at another school district in the same state. And they don't ask about, what happened at the previous school. Sometimes the union contract doesn't allow them to ask about what happened in the previous school district. And if they weren't fired, it's like, okay, well, nothing bad happened. I just left, and they can come up with an excuse to why they're finding a job somewhere else. But this just popped up this week. And so lawmakers need to do more to hold sexual deviants accountable in the public school system as well. One thing I'll say is that in Texas, where I live, a representative named Mitch Little, he's a Republican, and last year during session, he filed and passed a bill to abolish immunity for public schools and their employees when it comes to cases of sex abuse. Which raised the question of why did they have immunity in the first place? Like, it's just, And even half the Democrats voted for it, even though they're in bed with the teachers' unions. The Republicans all voted for it. The Democrats mostly voted for it. And, you know, maybe this is a blueprint for other states if they have problems on the books that are, you know, reducing penalties and stuff for misconduct in the public schools. I will say this has been researched over time. It's been pretty consistent. The Department of Education did a report on this in 2005, and they estimated that about 1 in 10 children will experience educator sexual misconduct by the time they graduate from high school. 1 in 10. And you might say, well, maybe things have gotten better over time. No, they've gotten worse, especially with social media devices, technology. Teachers can interact with the students a lot easier than they could before. Well, a new study came out a couple of years ago. It was covered in Psychology Today. You can look it up. And that now finds that about 12% of students will experience some form of sexual abuse from the educators or other forms of misconduct by the time they graduate from high school. So it's ticked up, if anything. And so, again, getting back to Marissa's video from PragerU, it's not just test scores. There's so many layers of problems. You just, you know, even throughout this podcast, Stephen, I even forget about some of these things, and we're having to bring it up at the very end because it's there's just so much dysfunction in the public school system. It's almost like we just got to burn it to the ground and salt the earth and start over again with one-room schoolhouses, figuratively speaking, of course.
Right, but of course.
Yeah, figuratively speaking. We're not doing anything violent here. We're just talking ideas.
Yes. You know, it's unbelievable when you look at the totality of all these things, the culmination of all this, the amount of divisiveness, you know, like you were talking about, the rampant abuse of these children, the taking advantage of our most precious little ones, the most vulnerable amongst us, and we are using them as cannon fodder for our political purposes and for our financial well-being. I mean, it's absolutely abhorrent. And I must say, I really appreciate you and your expertise and your wealth of knowledge when it comes to this. I mean, the amount of things that you are able to do and espouse and talk to and speak to is just absolutely incredible. And we need voices like you in this fight. Thank you so much for your diligence. Thank you for your book, The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals, Ruining Our Schools. Goodness gracious, Corey, thank you for your time.
Thank you much, Stephen.
Oh, that was absolutely amazing. These are the type of people that are on the front lines of this fight, fighting for our kids, fighting for our children. We need more individuals out there. We need you out there fighting for our kids as well. I mean, he's only one man. And the wealth of knowledge that he has and how he's weaponized his mind to be able to go against these people, it is absolutely phenomenal. So we need you in the fight as well. This is not a one-person battle. This is an all of us thing. Our children are, as he said, the salt of the earth. They're the treasure of us and of ours. And we need to be able to protect them at all costs. And I think that when it gets to this battle, when it comes to this battle, I mean, it's Ephesians 5:11, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Expose them. And that is exactly what he is doing. That is exactly what Corey was doing, was not only is he abstaining from it, and which is what we're supposed to do as well, not only abstain from the darkness, but also expose the darkness. This is what we are called. And I always ask people, what is darkness? What is darkness? What darkness is not the presence of more darkness or an abundance of darkness. Darkness is the absence of light. That's what darkness is. Darkness is the absence of light. The darkness that's growing within our country is the absence of people standing up for the right thing, standing up on the courage of our convictions and fighting for what we know to be right. The darkness that is encroaching our school systems and our school districts is because we, the parents, have abdicated our responsibilities and given all responsibility, all of our duties to the school system and say, do with our children as you wish. This is what we have told the school district. And we know that these are commie camps. We know that these are indoctrination centers. We know that our children are being sent to the wolves, and we are sending them as parents Our number one duty, our number one job is to protect our children, if anything. But yet and still we are sending our children to the very mechanisms that are corrupting them and their future, corrupting our country, corrupting their minds and our minds, and the social media. You put that on top of it. You put the media on top of that. You put the educational system on top of that. You put the friends on top of that. All these people are corrupting your kids, and we are sending our children to Caesar, and we are so confused and surprised that they come back as Romans. I want to play one more clip as to how we can better serve our children and serve the future generations. Play this clip and then we'll get a reaction from that afterward.
You want to know how we save the country? We raise more good people. If we raise more good people than bad people, more righteous people, people that love the Lord and love liberty and love our nation, then we win. It's simple math.
It doesn't get much more simpler than that, honestly. It doesn't get much more simpler than raising individuals who are going to be morally sound and we could put into the society, who are going to be lovers of this country and lovers of God and lovers of one another. This is the type of culture that we need. This is the type of people that we need within our system. And when we don't have that, our society fails. When we don't have that, we have a system right now where we have a bunch of people running around promoting ideologies that are so antithetical to human flourishing. When we have a bunch of bad people running the show, unchecked, this is the type of situation that we come about with. And this is the end result of such a situation. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all do our due diligence. Let us all make the choice right now to be purposeful and driven to stand up for our kids. They're the most vulnerable amongst us. And throughout the revolutions, through all the different times of history, all these revolutions, all these Marxist revolutions, I want you to know this, they always involved children. The Cambodian Revolution, they had child soldiers. When it comes to the Chinese Revolution, you better believe they used the kids, right? The Red Guard, if you will. Go and look that up. When it comes to the Bolshevik Revolution, all these different, the North Korean Revolution, right? When it came to the Cuban Revolution, even when it comes to the revolution, the sexual revolution here in the United States of America, who did they target? The college age, the young idealistic American who wants the best for their country, whose brains are not fully developed. And they're the ones who are preyed upon time and again. And we allow this preying to happen. We send our children to be preyed upon. And we don't do the due diligence. We don't have the table discussions with our children in which we ask them more than just, how was your day at school? There's so much more to the conversation than, how was your day? Fine. What'd you learn? Nothing. And then you send them on their way. You need to be purposeful. You need to be involved. If you're going to send your children to Caesar, understand this, and I don't mean to come down hard on you, but understand this. You have to look at reality for what it is. If you're sending your children to the public school system, you're sending them to Caesar. And if you're sending your children to Caesar, you have to be very diligent in making sure that you understand what's going on with your kids. Because I don't know how many times I've talked to parents who said, I don't know what happened to little Johnny. I don't know what happened in this situation. I don't know what happened. He was raised in a conservative home. How in the world did he turn out into a blue-haired, piercings all over his face, calling him a he, him, she, her, attack helicopter? How did this become? How did this happen? And it's because we have failed to be proper parents to our children. We have to be very diligent, and we have to be on top of our children when it comes to who we are sending them off to, which is ultimately Caesar. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our duty. This is our task as parents and as adults. We are to look after the next generation of individuals. That is what we are tasked to do. So let's do exactly that. And with that being said, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Disturbing the Peace. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Set your notifications so you know when we are going live. Check us out on Apple and Spotify. And be generous, of course. Give us a 5-star review and support this work and the mission at hand, which, of course, is disturbing the peace.